Hello, everybody. You tuned in to the July session of our Beyond Borders Impact Series. My name is Leanna San Pedro, and I'm with the team from EWB's Toronto National Office. Now, before we get started, there are a few quick housekeeping items for everyone in attendance. First, today's session is scheduled for 1 hour. If you need to log off beforehand, don't worry, the session is being recorded and we'll share it with you within 24 hours after the webinar. Secondly, in the spirit of the Beyond Borders series, we want and welcome your participation in the conversation. So even though all attendees are muted, please feel free to send us your comments and questions by using this Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Several of my colleagues are on hand to answer your questions directly, and our panelists will also be answering as many of your questions as possible at the end of the webinar. Lastly, I do want to highlight our webinar code of conduct. The Beyond Borders series of live engagements has been designed to facilitate open and thoughtful public conversation. Any form of harassment, abuse, or similar behaviors discourages other attendees from openly expressing themselves, and ultimately, this devalues the conversation as a whole. So while we welcome those who might have opposing viewpoints, abusive and aggressive tactics or language will not be tolerated. Unfortunately, those who violate this code of conduct will be asked to excuse themselves from the session. Finally, I am happy to introduce Courtney Bullinson, your host for today's conversation.
Thanks so much. Hello, welcome everyone. Good morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you're joining us from. So excited to be with you today and with our panelists. My name is Courtney Bullinson. I'm an evaluation consultant, but I have a long history with EWB. I was a fellow in Ghana back in 2013, and then I was also the Impact Evaluation and Learning Manager from 2017 to 2019. And then most recently, I was involved as a consultant working with EWB to measure the outcomes of this gender lens investing pilot that we're going to hear about today. Also on that project, I helped EWB put together a comprehensive systematic literature review of gender lens investing in Sub-Saharan Africa. And that publication will be coming out in the next few weeks as well, so stay tuned for that. And so I just want to give us a bit of a kickoff before I bring in our panelists. So first of all, this panel is about a gender lens investing pilot program that was funded by the Mastercard Foundation. And as an impact investor, EWB's main goal was to understand how to incorporate and support early stage ventures while also integrating a gender lens into their investment work. And so that was the focus of this pilot project. And so we're going to hear from our panelists today about how that process went. And before we do that, I want to mention on this topic that there's a gender lens investing report that was just released. It was shared with the EWB community. In case you missed it, you can find that in the news section on EWB's website. That's ewb.ca. And so you can get a copy of the report there, and that provides really wonderful details about the process of this pilot, the results, the learnings, and some of the tools that were actually used. So please do make sure that you go and take a look at that in more detail. And so now let's get to our panelists. We have two wonderful panelists with us today representing two of the 4 ventures that participated in this pilot. And so I'll ask each of them to introduce themselves and tell us a bit about their company, where they're based, and what the focus of their company's work is. So first I'll ask George, if you could tell us about yourself and about Patasente, we'd love to hear that.
Thank you so much. My name is George Beckham. I'm an Afrocentric entrepreneur, passionate about building business solutions to social and economic challenges in Uganda and Africa at large. And I co-founded Patasente, which is basically a neobank for SMEs, traders, and freelancers. And what we basically do is we offer them a safe digital account that allows them to send or receive money, order from suppliers, invoice customers, and get working capital loans for their business. And it's free accessible via our web and mobile application. So of course, interests in a gender-sensitive approach was more premised on the idea that most entrepreneurs within the distribution value chains, all at the base of the supply chains, people who produce tend to be women. And you basically wanted to know how best to design an experience that actually meets and serves their needs. Thank you.
Thank you so much, George. And we have Beatrice with us today, but it looks like she may have just dropped off briefly from the webinar. So George, why don't we proceed? I'll ask you one of our discussion points, and when she's able to join back in, I'll have her introduce herself and Viamo so we can learn a bit about them as well. Great. So the first question I want to ask you, I'm so glad you started to talk about the work that you were already looking at with regards to Patasente and women in the value chain and where they are and what that means in terms of how you structure your work. So I'd love to hear about a little more about that and why you decided to take on this pilot project with EWB. What about it triggered your team's commitment, and how did it sort of address those prior conversations about gender that you were having?
That's a good question. I think for us it was two things. One is that we had some kind of assumption that women would be very good customers for our business, especially you hear things like women are better payers of loans than men, and our business is basically factoring driven, working capital provision driven. And we had seen that a certain component of our factoring was actually women entrepreneurs. But there was no intentional design of an account or an experience that really was oriented towards women needs or women entrepreneur needs. So we wanted actually to see if there's something that we could do that could be intentional about how we design our products, make sure they meet the needs of women entrepreneurs. So I think there was a little bit of an idea that we weren't interested in it, but how to approach the entire experience of doing that we didn't have. I think that was one. But also on the second level was simply that if you are doing factoring or providing working capital to entrepreneurs or supply chain finance, whatever you choose to call it, then you might be interested in, who is a better performer, right? So I think the second for us was, can we design within our product metrics that allow us to measure performance between women entrepreneurs and maybe youth-run ventures, maybe men-run ventures, and actually compare and contrast. And from that, actually create a strategy that actually allows us to grow. So for us, those were the main two motivations that actually got us interested in participating in this project. Yeah.
Thanks so much, George. And Beatrice, thank you so much for joining us this morning. And we would love to hear a bit of an introduction to who you are, who Viamo is, your role there, and where you're based. I know Viamo is a global company, so maybe tell us a little bit about that structure. Oops, Beatrice, I think you're muted.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you so much, Courtney. Once again, I apologize for the misconnection that I had earlier on, so I had to reconnect again. Indeed, I am very grateful to be part of this session today. I must say I am honored. A brief introduction about myself. So my name is Beatrice Akodankwa. I'm a gender advocate who is passionate about women's representation in the workplace. I have experience in advocating for women through the use of mobile technology, especially in the area of sexual violence. My dedication on Viamo's sexual violence hotline helped reach a lot of women and adolescent girls who needed help in a couple of years ago, when I had to step into the shoes of the gender advocacy person who was absent for a while. Currently, I am the operations manager for Viamo design and implementation team, which sits 3 different hubs in Asia, Africa, being in Anglophone in Accra, Ghana, and also in Senegal, which are responsible for our Francophone projects. I find myself in the Accra team currently. A little introduction about Viamo. I would say that Viamo is have more than 100 staff spread over 20 countries and working on projects in more than 40 countries. And so basically, even though we are physically in 20 countries, we work in more than 40 countries. We truly work on a global scale to catalyze a mobile tech focused movement, connecting nonprofits, governments, and businesses to the people they serve using digital technologies that they have in their own pockets. I must say that I was really happy to be part of this awesome work that was done by EWB in partnership with Mastercard Foundation somewhere last year. And this was as a result of my interest with gender activities and advocacy. And so I got to be part of this through my HR person in the person of Sally Hughes and Alex, who unfortunately was not able to join this afternoon, but I trust that we will do a perfect job today. So hi to everyone, happy to be here and most importantly, honored. Thank you, Courtney.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, for that introduction to yourself and to Viamo. And I think already we can see that there's such a difference between the structure of Patasente and Viamo in terms of scale, in terms of what your companies do. And so I just point that out because, again, I think it would be great for our audience to go and take a look at that Gender Lens investing report, because we actually talk about how this pilot worked with that diversity of companies and what that meant in terms of what worked well and where there were challenges. And so there's some really interesting stuff there that we won't necessarily get into today. But Beatrice, I wanted to ask you another question. Before you hopped back on the call, George was sharing why Patasente and himself decided to get involved in this pilot project. And I'd like to ask that of you as well, especially, you mentioned some of the gender work that Viamo already does. So this is a company that has already been thinking about gender. You have the sexual violence hotline that you are working on in a couple of different countries. And so what was it about this pilot that triggered your team's commitment? That kind of, what did it bring that was different from what you were already doing?
Great, thanks Courtney for that. So I must say that for our team, because we reach out to a lot of people that we serve, both being female and males, this was really interesting to us because then it was giving us an opportunity to, as it were, look into more into our gender lens in every aspect of our activities that we are already engaging in. And so internally, we wanted to make like cautious efforts and into making sure that gender lens was factored into every activities that we were looking into. Being its recruitment strategy that we already had, being its developing HR metrics for measurements, in terms of performance reviews and promotions, being it Viamo already work that we're doing externally. And so in the area of reaching out using our 321 services, which is a free service and which sends across information to people to make decisive and important decisions, and even improving our sex disaggregated data collection and analyzing techniques. So in effect, we wanted to be able to make sure that indeed we were putting in like cautious efforts and more dedicated time to make sure that gender lens is not, as it were, being biased in our organization, being it cautious bias or incautious, unconscious one, we really wanted to make sure that we were factoring in gender lens here.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Beatrice. So I want to get us into a bit of a discussion about the pilot project itself. So what were some of the activities that you did with EWB as part of that? And one of the key steps, and in fact, one of the very first steps of the pilot program was for each venture team to undergo a gender analysis using a couple of tools that EWB had developed. And through that process, you were actually assigned a gender score. And so I'd love to hear, maybe George, we'll start with you this time and hear about one thing about that process, the gender analysis and the gender scoring process that you learned or that you found was really important. And George, actually, if you're able to turn on your video, I know the audience would love to put a face to a name if that's possible.
Thanks, Courtney. Video won't be possible because I'm moving, so the network will a little bit struggle.
No
but I'm happy
problem. No problem, thanks.
Yeah, so when Laura came to us to do her gender assessment, she found that while we had an intention to actually serve women customers, just to start with, our team was all male. Okay, we are young, but we are all boys. And there was a little bit theory around that, how can you design a gender sensitive product unless you have women on your team? And then she also discovered that even as we were designing our app, our systems, we didn't have a structured process on actually collecting feedback from female customers on how they find the product, will they like it, what do they want as features. So we actually didn't have a process around that. So I think for us, the gaps began just from how human resource internally, but also didn't have a process around actually how do we hire with a gender sensitive outlook. Then how do we collect feedback from potential customers, also existing customers, to actually influence our design, but making sure that actually women customers are always part of that process. And then thirdly was that if we had intentionality around supporting women entrepreneurs, was Patasente building a solution within supply chains, all at levels of supply chains, where women customers might potentially be. I think for the beginning, those were the glaring gaps that we had. So part of much of our process was about working with Laura to figure out how do we go about those in a way that still fits within our startup experience budget. And that was the experience, yes.
Wonderful, thank you for that detail. And Beatrice, I'd love to ask you the same question from Viamo's experience working through that gender analysis and the gender score. Could you tell us one or a couple things about that process or what you learned from that score that you found really important?
Great, thank you so much, Courtney. So for me, one of the very valuable activities that I think I would say it was a takeaway for me was looking more or creating a gender inclusive recruitment strategy. As part of my responsibilities, I am also responsible or help with recruitment stages for our unit, which is the design and implementation team. And one of the things that we have tried to make sure this is done is to make sure that we issue recruitment protocols that would include the use of the JD template, plus application of for gendered language through the internal postings and external postings. We've also made sure that the recruitment protocols is composed of recruitment panel that is gendered balanced, and so for the phases of recruitment processes that we go through for any form of recruitment, would ensure that indeed the panel has a gender balance in there. There's a diversity of shortlisted candidates in here. And one of the things that we also look out for is to ensure that the final 3 that we shortlist has like a gender balance in there before we go through the final interview session, which is something that is great because then we are in, which sort of would help us as, sorry, I'm getting a feedback that internet connection is unstable. I hope I'm still heard.
You're back with us. You just cut out for a moment.
Oh, okay. Very sorry about that. So like I was saying, so basically in our recruitment process now, we make a very cautious effort to ensure that there's gender balance or gender lens factored in every stage of which is very, very helpful to all of us here. I can speak of another one that I must say that I was truly happy about, which had to do with our HR, or as it were, our career progression. And so that is something that I was really happy about. We had to ensure that or develop HR metrics for measurements, which included gender as well. And so things like promotion rates, we would want to say male versus female, trainings, band levels, professional development budgets, and the likes. We are making sure it's not something that as an organization, we could only say that we give. Typical example being like professional development. This is something that where from the onset where I joined Viamo, it was made clear, but now we are looking at how best can we support people. And in terms of this, we are looking at female versus male. Do we have to making cautious efforts of the fact that females or male women would probably have other responsibilities at home or a lot of work to do at Viamo. So how does it help to support you? Do we, if we take some tasks from your plates, would you be able to go through a career development for yourself, which sort of is making more cautious efforts to ensure that there's a balance when it comes to people who are assessing the career development benefits that we have as an organization. As versus when we make it so open, then it becomes difficult for, quote unquote, most women to be able to access it. And so this is like something that I'm happy. It was an activity that was brought up, and we sort of looked at it in a more deeper way.
Thanks, Beatrice, and thanks for diving into some of the activities that actually came out of that gender analysis. So you were kind of describing some of the really important pieces of work that you were able to dive into and begin to accomplish after the gender analysis, which was able to sort of raise these gaps to Viamo's attention. And so I actually have a follow-up question to that for you, which was, you know, as you've been implementing those activities so far, how has that been embraced by the leadership at Viamo, but also junior members of your team?
Awesome. So this has been very welcomed by our executive level, such that, like I mentioned earlier, on some of these things, it could either be unconscious bias or it could be a conscious one, but we would want to term it as unconscious bias here. And this is something that I am happy to share here, that at Viamo team has set up like a task force or a committee that is looking at this in a deeper or a diverse way. We had a session this afternoon making sure to address conscious or unconscious biases. And some of the things that came up were unconscious biases to female or to gender biases, as we would want to put it. And some of the things that came up were very, very interesting, but I feel that this has happened as a result of the fact that we participated in this program that UWB brought up to us. And so Alex, the HR manager, is making sure that consciously we are, as an organization, discussing some of this. And this is discussed as org-wide. And so we have, it's an open forum where we have both executive team coming together with junior fellows, managerial people, and all of us, and we are able to speak freely on things that are happening, being it cautious or unconscious, but at least at the end of the day, we are voicing things out, and the executive team is also happy to hear some of these coming out and has promised that they will definitely look into it and ensure that the right things are done moving forward as an organization and even as a team, as we reach out to a lot more people than anyone can think of, because we work, our work is more of mobile technology. And so this has been very helpful to us as a team.
Thank you so much, Beatrice. George, I'd love to bring you in as well. And so you started to share with us some of the key things that came out of the gender analysis process. And so I invite you to tell us in a little more detail, you know, the next step in that process was to collaboratively develop a gender action plan with different objectives that you wanted to accomplish, and then begin to actually implement that plan. And so please share with us a little more detail about the activity or a couple of activities that you feel have been most successful in terms of that implementation so far, and what that's been like for your organization.
Yeah, thanks, Courtney, for that. Two things came from that process. I think the first one for us was, they found us at stage actually when we were thinking about how do we pivot our product to actually make sense for women customers. So, but also build a sales process and a sales team that engages and ensure that actually women customers are designed for. I think that was the second part. And then the third was simply us testing our assumptions around credit performance to women customers vis-a-vis men customers. So part of the process we worked about was with Courtney, rather with Laura, was primarily about one on recruitment. We were recruiting, so we were assisted on designing a proper gender sensitive process on how do you get more women applicants, how do you ask questions, how do you give a chance from test out, probation, and then finally hire. And we actually managed to, after three bad trials, all 3 failures, we actually got a very wonderful female candidate for actually a sales job. And then the second part was simply doing customer research, but ensuring that the people we're actually interviewing, much of them included potential target customers who are women within the supply chains we are supporting. That was the second part, which also actually worked out well. We were surprised as us that the results of that survey, which we shared, actually indicated that women were more likely to be actually better customers of our service, even as we are building an app. Who was most likely to use it? Even the user interface, what is slow? They making it bright colored and the like, mostly came from women customer feedback. And I think after that iteration of product design, the next was simply to study the performance of our credit book. So we noticed that we had mostly, in the beginning, mostly participated at the bottom of the supply chain, or the base of the supply chain, but still really working with simply traders. And what that meant that you didn't have many women actually participating at that level. But within our culture value chains, when we moved up the supply chain from the cooperative to actually entrepreneurs running trading companies that buy farmer produce and supply to factories, mostly actually are women. And when we began actually focusing on those parts of the value chain, we got actually more women customers. In fact, at a certain part within this year, about 60% of our credit was actually going to women customers, more than men. Previously, it was about 28%. It's only COVID that actually changed that picture a little bit. But what we found was that when you focus on different parts of the supply chain, with intentionality to actually support women entrepreneurs, then you can actually make them beneficiaries of your product or service. So a little bit, that was mostly the breadth and depth of what our gender program looked like. What we feel like now is that we are not doing gender work as something we add within product design, but actually more like, this is what we want to offer as a product. How do we make sure actually it makes sense for our customers? So ours has been, do it because it makes good business strategy and becomes part of your own actually design and product of your product as you grow. Yeah.
Thank you so much, George. And yeah, it's really interesting to hear not just what the activities you were doing, but some of those learnings that were already coming out about that women being more customers in ways that you didn't expect, and also learning about where on the supply chain women are sitting and how you might tailor things more effectively so that you're addressing their needs at the different levels of the supply chain. So thanks for sharing those learnings. And you mentioned COVID-19, and I'd love to actually talk about that a little bit because, you know, COVID-19, this global health crisis, came about right in the middle of the implementation of this pilot project. And so it really did start to impact the work that we were trying to do on the pilot project. So I'd love to hear, maybe George, if you want to start this time, tell us a little more specifically about how the pandemic has affected your gender lens work, not just on the pilot, but also how it continues to kind of affect your work now, maybe for both the challenges, but maybe there's actually been some interesting positives that have come out of that. So we'd love to hear more about that.
So for us, primarily, we are a factoring company. We give working capital loans. So the first impact was for any business that is giving out credit, the impact of COVID has been direct because now you've had to restructure most of the debt, but also when people are under lockdown, what has happened is that most women entrepreneurs have actually not been in oscillation. I think it has tended to be men who can figure out a way of beating curfew, figure out logistics, and keep moving products. But how many customers we noticed simply actually kind of went on a stop, right? So that meant that even when we restructured debt for loans that were not performing, our women customers tended to be mostly the most affected. So simply, I think, as far as COVID is concerned for us, it has, yes, generally impacted everybody. That business went on a standstill. They couldn't meet their debt obligations, but we noticed that people who tried to continue doing something, some business, even when there is intended to be men than women. So that's a little bit I can speak about that. And I think if you're not trading, then everything, as far as we are concerned, stops. You don't make payments, you don't procure, you don't invoice customers and the like. So user activity also dropped, but also we noticed that it dropped more among women customers than actually male customers. Yes.
Thanks, George. And Beatrice, same to you. I'd love to hear more about how COVID-19 has impacted your work, particularly around gender as well.
Great. Courtney, just like you had stated earlier on, COVID-19 is a global pandemic which has impacted every sphere of everyone's life. For us at Viamo, I would say that in terms of gender lens, with our work that we do, it's a bit difficult to actually say that it's either gone higher, impacted, or less of an impact, given that our work is more not physical into contacts with people, but via the mobile. And so for what we know is the fact that we've had a lot more people accessing key messages, which are particularly the COVID protocols, washing of your hands, social distancing, and the likes. And this is reflective in our data that we have collected, such that because women, as it were, are most of the time who are in the homes with their kids. Yes, a lot more people are also, a lot more people are working remotely, having men also in the house, but we can all agree that indeed we sort of have more women in the house. And so it helps to have like a lot more women getting informed on the protocols, because then it transcends into the number of children that would also be saved out of the COVID-19 diseases or spread. And so this has really been helpful to us at Viamo. We are reaching more women. We have more women assessing the key messages in our various countries that we are working within, and which is really helping with COVID curbing here. Internally, I would say that we have put a lot of assistance in place by our executive team. I for one can speak for myself. I didn't have a nanny or a care. And so when COVID started and my kids were to stay home, juggling between work and taking care of the kids was really hectic for me. And so internally, our executive team set up like a committee or a task force to help people who needed any sort of help. And I accessed that one. And so I got myself a care who, even though I'm working remotely in the house, wouldn't have to worry about my kids, because then there's somebody who helps me with the kids as well. And so I would say that gender lens, I feel that Viamo has included a lot of plans, or has adapted a lot of strategies to help us to go through it more effectively. Yeah.
Thank you, Beatrice, and thanks for sharing some of your personal experience with that too, and a really important gender component as well. So we're going to move into the portion of this panel where we start to answer some of our audience submitted questions, and we have a few to start with, so we'll start to work through those. But I do want to invite our audience today. We have the privilege of having George and Beatrice with us, so please don't be shy. Write your questions in, and we'll try and get as many answered as possible. So the first question we have, I'll just read it out as it was written. So I'm a professor at Humber College who teaches social entrepreneurship. I have been approached by an organization called Village of Love, excuse me, Kijiji Cha Upendo in Kenya, who is interested in setting up a social enterprise for women there. So the question is, what are the steps that you, or the panelists, would recommend for getting ideas for social enterprises that these women can set up? Or linking up with social enterprises that can help these women set up those social enterprises, or to become trained and work for social enterprises that are already in existence. or also about microcredit loans and assistance. So just sort of in general, this is a group that's looking to get these social enterprises going. So what kinds of recommendations in your own experience might you share? Maybe Beatrice, we'll start with you.
Yeah. I'm happy to share that because I find myself having like some sort of experience outside Viamo, which has to do with social enterprises for women. So I can speak from that perspective. I am also like a member of that foundation where we try as much as possible to help women set up like social enterprises here. I would say that the very first thing that we would want us to do here or to encourage most women is to sort of let them know who they truly are, what values or how empowered they can be. I feel that for the majority of women out there, maybe from the Sub-Saharan Sahara also, it's about building confidence in them and letting them know that they can. There's a lot out there that they can actually do, and then as a way, giving them some trainings on basic basic form of things they can do with their own hands. Maybe if I speak from the foundation that I find myself in, a lot more women were happy when we approached them. They were happy to be part of the foundation, but again, they felt that they didn't have anything to bring on board. But once we gathered all of them and made them know that every one of us is very valuable, and we were happy to train them on a couple of things that it can be like a source of income for them, they were happy about it. And so what we did was to bring in more trainers to train people on how to do like locally made soap, things like how to do beading. These are things that you can easily do even if you have like your child or your children at home to take care of. You could squeeze in a bit more time, how to bake pastries, and then how to brand the things that you are doing. Because after you do, if you are into bead making, then after doing the bead, you need to be able to market it. So you need to brand it or package it in a way such that it will be attractive to others to patronize. And so basically, these are like some few steps that you can look out for here. But again, this is also dependent on geographical location, because then one needs to as it were, study what their location is. What are some of the things that people are interested in getting, and what are the skill sets that those women would need to be able to put in place here. So let's get it from the nitty-gritty of what these women can actually do, what needs are there, and then we can take it from there. I'm happy to share more on some experiences that I've gathered from this foundation if the need be.
Great, thanks for that in-depth response, Beatrice. And I imagine if the person who wrote that question wants to reach out to the EWB email, that they might be able to get in touch with you through that for any follow-up recommendations. But George, I'm sure you have some things to add here too, so I'd like to invite you to also respond to this question.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I wouldn't differ very much from what Beatrice has been speaking. Maybe I would simply be much more specific. I think it would be mostly location static businesses, location static enterprises, where basically we are speaking of either a small manufacturing concern, for example. And even when women were basically held in two homes, I got an idea that maybe they could actually do home cottage industries, right? So what she was speaking about, manufacturing soap, or tailoring masks and stuff like that, such that the distribution of those then become the component of those who can actually afford to the hustle and bustle of actually moving trucks and the like. So I thought that with post-COVID recovery, it might be more profitable and more attuned for women entrepreneurs to be in location static business. And that could either be, for example, a supermarket remained a place where we needed to get goods even in our localities. So could such businesses in retail space be run by women entrepreneurs, rather, but also just manufacturing, right? So if you produce clothing or masks or even just processing food, then that's an opportunity actually women entrepreneurs would actually explore. Though I still feel that without offering them actual tools to actually survive and keep consumers coming, keep them being able to buy supplies, being able to collect their debt from customers who buy on credit, then they face much more the same effects like any other entrepreneur. So any business, even within our space, that actually looks to increase access to credit, easiest trade for these women entrepreneurs will actually be good business. That's what I could say on that, yeah.
Thanks for adding that detail, George. And I'll just also piggyback off of what you both were sharing and just bring up again the fact that there's a literature review coming out as part of this project. And part of that literature review actually provides an overview of barriers and facilitators to the types of social and financial outcomes that gender lens investing aims to achieve. And so I do recommend for everyone, but in particular this individual, to take a look at that publication when it comes out, because there might be some really good detail there about, you know, things to lean into because they're expected to sort of facilitate the outcomes of social enterprise for women, and things that you might need to pay attention to mitigate. So that's a good place to start. And the other thing I'll just mention is that EWB does strive in their work to bring what's called a transformative evaluation lens to their work. And part of that is, as you're kind of developing pilots, as you're trying new things, which is similar to what we're talking about here in setting up new social enterprises, is starting from a contextual place, working with local communities. So there's a local organization that has approached you, that's great. So maybe tapping into other successful local NGOs that are doing these types of things, who are maybe they're providing microcredit loans to women. So finding who they are and getting connected in and seeing if you can develop some sort of partnership there. And like Beatrice was talking about, you know, the geography and the context is so critical. So making sure that you're also starting from a place of just doing a bit of a needs assessment or a contextual analysis that involves those women that you're looking to work with, who are interested in becoming social entrepreneurs, and see what their skill sets are, what their interests are, what their community needs are, is a really good place to start in terms of direction. But yeah, all of those tools can be helpful as you explore that. And so moving on to another question. So we have a question directed at Beatrice in particular. So Beatrice, what are the conscious and unconscious biases that you've experienced at Viamo? So you were kind of talking about that earlier. So a little more detail is being asked for.
That's really interesting. And I'm sure this is just directly for me. So I wouldn't say that I saw that as even a bias, and so one of my colleagues shared that this afternoon. And that was when he shared that he feels that it's a bit biased when people who do not have English as their first speaking language are on a team such as Viamo, where we have a lot more of our team having English as their first speaking, and you are on a call or in a meeting with them, and they tend to sort of forget and speak so fast, then so it's not a cautious thing, but he feels that it's a bit biased because we all need to make efforts to accommodate each other as a team. So then we need to be able to look at it from the point where we both agree that not everyone has English as their first language, and so you would slow down when you are speaking the language, and you would also make room for those of us who do not have like English as their first speaking language to make some spellings or the likes. Oops.
So I think you cut out just for a second there at the end, if you don't mind repeating so we don't miss your message.
Oops, am I back?
I think you're back with us, yeah. The struggle of the internet.
Yep, sorry again. So basically that was one thing, like I'm saying, it didn't strike me as a bias. And so it's still very difficult for me to think through like my own personal bias, being it conscious or unconscious, that I've experienced in Viamo. But outside Viamo, certainly I can share one, and that is when I sometimes would want to give my husband a treat, and so I would want, when we go out, beforehand I would let him know that, hey, I am taking you out today. And after everything, when the bill is brought, it's sort of given to him, because then they feel that, oh, he's the man, so the bill is sent to him. Even when you take it and you make the payment, and the waiter, there's supposed to be like a change given back. He goes and then he gets the change, and when he's returned back, he gives it to the man, to my husband. I'm like, no, this is me here. Which is something that I feel it's really biased towards like gender. Well, maybe it's also cultural, looking at where I'm coming from. I can't speak for the same for you, Courtney, or where others find themselves. But for me in Ghana, these are things that it often happens, and I feel it's very biased. Yes.
Thanks for adding a little more context there for us. So it looks like we have time for maybe one more audience question. And this one I'm really excited about as an evaluator, because I care about the sustainability of programs, and partly why we try and learn from what we're doing is so that we can improve upon it and enable some sustainability in the work. And that's what this question is about. So the question is, sometimes it can be hard to sustain an effort for internal improvements on something like gender equality when the work of a startup is already so busy. And I know in our interviews together at the end of this pilot project, we talked a lot about the challenges of a startup and trying to bring in additional focus like gender. So maybe tell us a bit about that experience, and specifically the question was, what measures were helpful for you to sustain your effort in implementing your gender action plan? But I think beyond that too, just in general, what was useful about this project with EWB that helped maintain some of those activities from the gender action plan? So maybe George, we'll start with you, and then we'll turn it over to Beatrice.
I think that's a very beautiful question, Courtney. I think for us, the first thing is not to look at gender work as something that's exclusive of the business, or it's outside the business and you're trying to add it in. But rather to look at it as actually part of your business to serve women customers. Right? Because any business that produces a product or service tries to look for customers. Now, for us, we're trying to build impactful solutions. I think we have to be intentional around when we're actually getting clients or customers for our services. Are we trying to be intentional about actually getting customers who are women to utilize our services? And there is value in it. So first of all, it's simply about, it should be good business for you to actually serve women customers, right? And be intentional around that when you're marketing, developing a marketing strategy and all the like, that you actually do that. Because even when you're a startup, customer acquisition, revenue growth, product design, those are basically what actually drive or keep a company existing. So for us, that was the first part, agreement with Laura that because we're doing this on our own internal budgets, was simply to see, okay, what are we actually working on? How do we make sure that we are intentional about all aspects of our process, whether it's product design, customer feedback, giving out credit to applicants, that we are intentional about. Let's make sure that there is some kind of attenuation towards do we actually get women customers for it. So I think for me, the most I can say about is not to look at gender as something that's outside the organization. I know, of course, when you're starting, you are not really focused on that, but it's good business. And for us, Patasente, that's what we have found out. I must say that our best performing customers are actually women customers. But because I think we've been intentional about actually, let's make sure that we increase the reach of our product or service to many customers, also let's look out for women. I think the second part is, especially in the context that this was a gender investing program, most of the startups, unless invested in, might not be able to reach these customers to the extent they might actually want to. And also when you're developing assumptions, like now for us, we're testing the assumption, is it true that women entrepreneurs might perform better for this kind of supply chain finance we offer vis-a-vis men entrepreneurs? Then you have to test that assumption with actual credit. And if you're testing assumptions with actual credit, then you might also do control trials. If I give a customer who is like this, who is a woman, and man who is like this, what will actually do? So unless a startup has resources, they can actually commit to such control trials and experiments, then you might not derive the kind of data that actually begins to move or create actually good case on why, for example, for us to give credit, it's better to actually do it this or that way. So for me, I think the second part was just good business, but also to ensure that actually investors, where they see possibility that this is a business that will actually serve women customers, investment actually goes into them to actually do that. I think for me, those would be the two things that I would touch on here.
Thanks, George. So what I'm hearing is, yeah, intentionality and actually really integrating things like gender so that it's not something separate. That really helps bring that sustainability to the work. And then using data, so actually testing assumptions, and that once you've seen the results of that, that can help inform your activities and actually help with that integration and sort of sustainable support. Thanks for sharing.
Absolutely.
Thanks. Beatrice, I'd love to hear from you as well around this sustainability idea. And so what's been helpful for you in sustaining these gender equity efforts in your organization, given the busyness of a startup? So you're on mute.
Yep, thank you. Great, Courtney. So for us at Viamo, to ensure that this gender lens is sustainable internally, to ensure that Viamo is a welcoming and supportive work environment for all employees globally. Some of the activities that we have made sure and documentation and processes are in place now. One of them is the employee protection and satisfaction. So we had a deep dive into the current Viamo policies and procedures. And we also looked into and developed the sexual harassment and safeguarding policy with the help of Laura. And a standardized promotions policy was also put in place. Other things that we looked at was in terms of how people are growing and feeling being part of the team, was to ensure that if you have a career ambition or you have your trajectory, then you could be supported by everywhere. If it has to do with you get with your plate being so full, so such that you're not able to have some time to take up like a course or something, then there's a need to look at giving an intern or someone to come in to help. And so we are looking at doing that now. I'm glad to share with everyone here that I am one of those beneficiaries. And so my intern hopefully would be starting very soon to give me the time or the space to be able to grow professionally. In terms of reaching out to our external clients or our end users, who we termed as our clients actually, we are focusing more on drawing more analysis from our data that we collect at the end of each campaign that we do, such that we are now looking more, we want to look more into gender, discretate into the information. So we would want to look at female versus male who actually responded to a survey or who listened to a key message if the package is an infoline campaign. So would want to look at that more holistically than we used to do. And this is really helping us because in Mali, we've recorded that we have most of our females responding to gender-based or gender-sensitive information that we pass across, which is quite helpful for us.
Thank you. And thank you so much to both of you for joining this panel today. It's been really wonderful to hear more of the insights from your experience in this project, but also just in general as social entrepreneurs and taking a gender lens to your work. And so we have reached the end of our webinar today. And before we sign off, I wanted to remind our audience, if you're not aware of it, that EWB has recently launched a virtual talent exchange, which is, it's a virtual volunteer program that aims to match talent with the needs of our ventures. And so if anyone in this, attending this webinar, if you know anyone in your community that might be interested in a virtual volunteer placement, these placements are so crucial because they directly help our partners like Viamo, like Patasente, so that those organizations can tackle the root causes of poverty and inequality, which is our ultimate goal as an organization. The skills it could be much more than engineering despite our names. So if you have skills in business development, accounting, digital communications, coding, all kinds of things, don't hesitate to reach out and we'll see if there's a good placement match for you. So yeah, finally, again, we've mentioned the report a number of times, but please do visit EWB's website, read the report for a whole lot more information about this pilot and how it went. And a big thank you again to Beatrice and George for joining us today and for everyone taking the time to join this webinar today. And we hope to see you at the next Beyond Borders session in August. So have a great day. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, everyone.